You are listening to Processing Trauma Out Loud, conversations about trauma and healing from two women who are doing the work.
Hey everyone, it's Kandace and Sher with Processing Trauma Out Loud. Sher, last week we started a new two-part series on what does it mean to be connected to our bodies, or what does it mean to be disconnected from our bodies. So if you have not listened to part one, go back and listen to that because this topic has a lot of complexity to it. We're not experts, but we are bringing our understanding of it and how it's making a difference in our own healing journey. And so, Sher, today we're going to talk a little bit around the idea of that when we're disconnected from our body, we are living in patterns of survival. So to be connected to our body, we have to stop betraying what our body knows, the wisdom of our body, and we have to break out of those survival patterns that we developed through childhood trauma. Can you break that down a little more simply, please?
Yeah, it's so good and it's so important. And I'll just even encourage our listeners, go back and listen to that 2 or 3 times, maybe even write it down. We get stuck in survival modes because of our trauma. When we are in a situation where we are surviving as a child, we're going back here to childhood, and this can happen in trauma at any age, but we're specifically talking about childhood trauma. But when we experience trauma, we disconnect from our body. This is how we survive. Then we get into roles, and a lot of times these are modeled through our, as women, we watch our grandmothers do it, we watch our mothers do it, and we watch the women in our environment doing a lot of these things, where we are betraying our body. We're not listening. We're not honoring the cries, the requests, the demands that our body is speaking to us. We don't even know how to tune into that, honestly. No one has ever taught us that wisdom. Yeah. And so we just keep saying no to what our body is asking for. And I will say what our body is desiring for our health and for our well-being. Mm-hmm. And we keep going through these roles that are roles of survival. And honestly, survival keeps us alive. Like, it's a good thing. I'm glad for survival. But then you get to this place where you're like, wow, I think there's a lot more in this life. And I'm at this place where I want more than survival. And what we're talking about here is that if we want more than survival, we have to stop betraying our body. Yeah. And so that's what we really want to talk about today is, what does it mean to betray our body? And then maybe what does it mean to, and you said a two-part series, but I'm not so sure it's only going to be 2, Kandace. Okay. But what does it mean to betray our body? And then I'd like to also talk about what does it mean to honor our body. So what are a couple of thoughts that come to your mind about some ways that you have betrayed your body, or that you have seen other women betraying their body?
Yeah, I think we had talked about this before we pressed record, but I was thinking of how the messages that we received about those roles to keep other people somewhat happy with us, or, for some kids to avoid getting a beating even. I mean, it can be anything. But for women especially, there's this role of the server, the helper. Serving and helping is a beautiful thing to do when you are listening to your body and you're making a conscious choice that I want to do this, right? Or, you know what, I don't really want to do this, but there's a level of, you know what, I need to do this. And that's okay too, as long as you're conscious about it. But what I see and what I've experienced is this being this yes person, but then noticing the resentment.
Yeah.
So when you're saying yes
Mm.
for any other reason other than you're making this conscious choice, not out of a survival or not out of a role that you're playing, you will end up with some level of resentfulness and bitterness. And the worst part about that is if you're in that place and then you're blaming other people, it's actually not the blame of other people. Your bitterness, your resentfulness is not to be blamed on other people. It's going to be more connected. Let's talk about how disconnected you are from your body, that you are saying yes when you mean no.
Yeah. Yeah. And we do it because we've been taught it by our grandmothers and our mothers and our society. And I think, and I'll just say for myself, I grew up in a community culture. I'll use that word. It was in my family, but I think it was in my small town. It was kind of small town culture that was very male dominating, very female serving. And I think that the level of resentment that was just openly expressed was just loud.
Yeah.
I think there was so much open belittling of women for, oh, she's moody, or she's, she's less than, or there was an exalting of masculine traits and a real diminishing of anything feminine, anything feminine. And so, and I think because this was a generational thing, and of course the women knew innately that this was not okay. Innately, we know that this is not okay, but because it's what they had been taught by their mothers and their grandmothers, like the roles just kept being played out, and women were surviving, but they were resentful. And this is the world that I grew up in.
Yeah. And I want to say this. Okay, so let's just say so the goal of service is joy, right? There's a level of joy.
Mhm.
You've been served, and over that overflow, you serve, right? So, but for the women who aren't resentful, right, but they're still not listening to their body, um, I want to suggest there are women in high levels of fear. I don't know if you watch this, and maybe some of our listeners have, but if you want a very good example of this, watch the documentary. Like, it's called "Be Sweet, Pray, and Obey." I don't know if you've heard of that, but I mean, these are the women, and there are women who've gotten out and who share their story now. But these women were under such control
Mm.
and had so much fear to question anything.
Mhm.
So you wouldn't see them as resentful. You would see them paralyzed in fear
Mm.
or extreme compliance, right? For
Yep.
survival.
Yeah.
Because the women who've gotten out and are telling their story now, um, yeah, I mean, had all kinds of things: fear, resentfulness, compliance, all the above. That's an extreme example, but I just thought of that when you were talking about the culture that
Yeah.
you're familiar with.
Yeah.
I mean, it happens.
Well, it's happening. I think it's prevalent. I think it's much more the norm than not the norm, in different levels of intensity or different levels of openness, right? But I think that so many women have experienced sexual harm of some kind. I'll just say sexual harm as that alone. They say one in three, I think, is the current statistic for women. I think 1 in 3. Then you put on top of that childhood neglect or other forms of abuse. So like if childhood trauma causes us to disconnect from our bodies, we will then continue to form relationships with people who keep us in these same patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Until someday we wake up or we have an awakening, we have an awareness, we see someone who's living differently, or we hear someone talking about things in a different context, and we begin to wonder, could there be something different? Could there be something more? As we begin to experience some healing of our childhood trauma, and we start to recognize, like, wow, this is a survival pattern, and I don't think I want to be stuck in that anymore. But what does it mean to not be stuck in it? And these are all places where we're going to enter more health, more healing, more freedom through how do we listen to our body? And coming back to what we named as betrayal, stopping to betray our body by disregarding when our body is saying no, or ignoring intuition, or having a desire to do something that expresses our creativity or our freedom, but then pushing that down and not giving it a place of honor because of fear or lack of time or lack of energy, right, to even go there. And how can we go from these places of betraying our body, which we didn't even get to yet? Like, often when we betray our body, we end up with illness, we end up with pain, we end up with autoimmune diseases. Not always. I am not making a blanket statement that every illness or every pain or every disease is a result of this, but I am a believer that many illnesses and much pain is because we are not listening to our body, and we don't listen to our body because we don't know. We've never been taught. The women in our lives didn't have the wisdom that they could pass to us. So we have to go out and we have to find the women who are wise in these ways and begin to sit at their feet and listen to their teaching and tell our stories and get healing and discover new ways so that we can learn, like, okay, I don't want to betray my body anymore. I don't want to be sick. I don't want to be in pain. I don't want to be resentful. How do we begin to honor our body? And we still have a few minutes. I'd like to talk a little bit about this, Kandace. Like, what are some ways that unless you have more to say about that, because I'm kind of turning the direction. Anything else you want to say about that before
I love hearing your passion around this, because I'm going back to our very first or our last episode of 2024. You said you have a desire to be connected to your body. So I'm hearing this passion in your voice as you're talking about this. And the only thing I want to say about that before we go into honoring our body, which maybe we can just do a part 3. I think that would be wise, because I think there's lots of ways we can do that.
Yeah.
But I want to say the shame of betraying your body. So we can have pain, we can have illness. I do believe all that too, what you were saying. But however way you're betraying your body, whether it's through the shame of not liking your eating habits, whether it's, maybe you're smoking and you are using that to deal with anxiety, but then you have this shame, or you're drinking more than you want to, or you're sleeping around, whatever it is, there is this point where the pain of shame becomes the doorway to get help.
Yeah.
And as much as I don't want people in the pain of shame, and I haven't wanted to be in the pain of shame,
yeah,
having the eyes of love looking back at me in the pain of my shame was my awakening.
Yeah. Yeah. In our healing, it wakes us up. It shocks us. It's shocking to be met with love when we have just exposed some of the places of our deepest shame. And it's the very thing that then begins to usher us into healing. Yeah, shame is it just keeps us stuck in the same roles, doing the same things that we hate.
Yeah. Yeah, so maybe let's save how we can honor our bodies, listen to our bodies, be connected to our bodies for a whole episode, and how we're doing that now, right? And really just inviting our listeners to listen to part 1 and part 2, and then be ready with a notepad to write some ways down or to think of ways of what makes you feel connected to your body and alive. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll close this out by asking our listeners to ponder this as we're talking about dreams and desires and betraying our body and being disconnected and wanting to be reconnected. And we kind of talked about this in the last episode of 2024, but what are you desiring? What are you desiring? What do you want, particularly in this area that we're talking about right here of getting out of the survival mode and being able to enter these spaces where we feel alive and free and connected and aware and all of the things that then bring us into joy and love and peace, which what are the things that we most want in life.
Amen.
Yeah. Hey.
Yeah. Good discussion again. And yeah, we will resume with ways that we can be connected to and honor our bodies.
Yeah, can't wait. And I'm looking forward to even just pondering this myself too, Kandace. So yeah. Good.
Love you, friend.
Love you too.
Thank you for listening to Processing Trauma Out Loud. Make sure to check out the show notes for links to suggested resources and social media. Like, subscribe, and follow to keep up with our weekly content. And if you don't mind, take a moment to rate and review us. Your feedback is extremely valuable and contributes to the success of this podcast. One last thing. If you have found this podcast helpful in any way, or if you have questions on how to take the next steps on your healing journey, please reach out to us via email at KandaceSher@gmail.com. That's KandaceSher@gmail.com. Our sound engineer is Jeremiah Jones of Auditory LLC. We welcome you to join us for more conversations soon. Take care.